Hi VC, hi YouTube, it's Rob here with another video. In this video I'm going to be talking about a really taboo subject, something that's really frowned upon in 2021, and it's smoking. So I've been looking through my collection and noticed I've got a healthy number of album covers that feature smoking. So I thought I'd do a video showing some of my favourites, some of the ones I don't like, but there's about 5 albums here that I really do like the covers, and they feature cigarettes. So I come at this as someone who doesn't smoke, so but for some reason some album covers with cigarettes appeal to me. So the first album I'm going to show is one of the most famous albums of all time. It's Abbey Road by the Beatles. So Paul McCartney on the zebra crossing holding a cigarette. All the Beatles smoked. George Harrison's death was attributed to lung cancer through smoking. John Lennon was a heavy smoker. I'm not sure whether Ringo and Paul still smoke, I'm not too sure. Interesting that in America they actually airbrushed the cigarette out of Paul's hand, which, you know, in the 1960s, you know, it was a national pastime to smoke. I mean, in the UK, in the 60s, I'm sure well over 70% of people smoked. So, I mean, really, if all the Beatles were smoking on that album cover, certainly wouldn't have raised any eyebrows. The only thing that's actually airbrushed on this album cover is the sky, because when they took the photo, it was a grey day, so they put a nice blue sky there. But yeah, interesting that in America, I've never seen an album cover of this without Paul holding the cigarette, but I'm sure plenty of people in America have got one. So yeah, Abbey Road by the Beatles. Now the second album I'm going to show, these first 5 are 5 of my favourite album covers, and this album's, you know, you might think, you know, what the hell have you got this in your collection for? I will explain, but it is one of my favourite album covers. I'm not sure about the record, but it's Van Halen and the album 1984. So very famous cover with the angel smoking, and it just always made me smile. In the UK, they actually put a sticker over the cigarettes. I mean, in '84, smoking was still pretty popular in the UK. There's actually a sticker on the back of the album, so I presume that sticker was over the cigarettes. But if this album doesn't have the cigarettes on it, it just doesn't have the same impact. So this album certainly used the cigarette as a selling point. I'm sure I've seen plenty of t-shirts with this image on. But when the band were given photographs for the album, they rejected them all, and then they looked in a portfolio and saw this image, and unsurprisingly they went with it. But I'd never actually heard this album. The reason I've got this album is I've spoken before that I went to a tip probably about 20 years ago, and I looked over the wall. There was a box of albums, about 60, and I managed to grab them all, and this was one of them. And I've never actually played it. It's been in my cubes for 20 years unplayed, but for doing this video I thought, you know, I need to give it a listen and talk about it a little bit, talk about the music. Now it features Jump, which is a song I've always liked. It sort of takes me back to the mid-80s, and for some reason really commercial. I really like that song. But it's funny because I was streaming it at work, and sort of in my own department, and we've got a new manager, Matt, really nice guy. I don't know him very well, but I did not want him to come into where I was working and for me to be listening to this album. So I was listening to it, and after about 6 or 7 tracks I couldn't take it anymore. There was a track called Hot for Teacher on here, which I can just imagine an arena of rockers all singing, you know, Hot for Teacher and I Can't Wait for Detention. You know, it sort of turned my stomach. but I'm not going to, you know, this is a great album cover. So, and the fact that there's cigarettes on it is one of the reasons. Right, the next album is one of my favourite album covers, and it's a really iconic album cover. If you look on lists of the best album covers, this one's on there. And why is it on there? It's Grace Jones and Nightclubbing. So Grace Jones, this was the first image I ever saw of Grace Jones. So I've always been attracted to Grace Jones, wearing the Armani suit. I mean, this album cover's been in art galleries. That's how well thought of it is. But if she wasn't smoking, if she didn't have an unlit cigarette, it would not have the same impact. So the fact that she's smoking, got an unlit cigarette in her mouth, is a big selling point of this album, part of its appeal, which is pretty interesting. And yeah, one of my favourite album covers. A really good album by Grace Jones, Nightclubbing. Okay, the fourth album is another album that is one of my favourite covers, and again it features a woman smoking. It's The and Soul Mining. So this painting was painted by a guy called Andy Johnson, who's the brother of Matt Johnson, who's the guy behind The. And the woman in question there is actually one of Fela Kuti's wives. So Fela Kuti, the Afrobeat Nigerian artist who I've been getting into recently, and this is one of his wives. I'm sure he had plenty of wives. The fact that she's sort of smoking a joint all adds to the appeal of this album cover. And this is an album that I've always thought was a good album, but I've been streaming this album this week, and it's a great album, and it's got a great sleeve, and it features someone smoking. So yeah, Soul Mining by The. Okay, the next album is definitely one of the most iconic album covers of all time. It's one of my favourites, and it features somebody smoking, and it's Nightfly by Donald Fagen. So Donald Fagen there, there's not that many photos of Donald Fagen knocking around, but you know, he looks pretty dapper on that sleeve, with the RCA microphone, listening to Blue Note music, button down shirt, tie, a packet of Chesterfield cigarettes, and holding a cigarette. And you know, if he wasn't holding the cigarette, it certainly wouldn't have the same impact. So another album that's enhanced by a cigarette. Now, these next albums are not my favourites, but they do have people with cigarettes. So the next artist is somebody whose albums, there's one or two that feature him smoking, and it's David Bowie. So David Bowie and this album, Ziggy Stardust, the motion picture from the 80s. But seeing a man smoking a cigarette, does it have the same impact? I'm not too sure, not for me. David Bowie was a heavy smoker. If you Google David Bowie, sort of in that sort of Duke period, nearly every photograph he's holding a cigarette. But for me, it just doesn't work on this album. But yeah, another album, someone smoking, David Bowie and Ziggy Stardust. Now, the next album was a blind buy, but it was a good blind buy. But when I saw the album cover, you know, I noticed that Tom Verlaine was holding a cigarette, and I think it's quite a good image. Tom Verlaine from television. Again, if he's not holding the cigarette, does it have the same impact? I don't think so. And this is a really good album. When I picked it up, like I say, it was a blind buy, but I was surprised how good it was. I really recommend this album, but it's another album with someone holding a cigarette. 3 to go, and go to the 50s, and you know, it was a national pastime to smoke, particularly sort of jazz artists. And I mean, I've not really jumped on the Blue Note bandwagon, but I'm pretty sure quite a lot of Blue Note albums feature people smoking. And I've got this Blue Note album, Miles Davis playing the trumpet there, and I did notice that he's holding a cigarette at the same time, so pretty skillful there. But when you think of jazz, you sort of think of smoke-filled rooms, and like I say, there's I've got a Duke Ellington album where he's holding a cigarette, and I think most jazz artists smoked, and I'm pretty sure that Miles Davis albums feature him smoking quite heavily. So yeah, jazz albums certainly feature people smoking. Now the next album is certainly one of my least favourite album covers, and it features somebody smoking. It's quite a good album. It's Van Morrison and Wavelength from 78. Now Van Morrison is not the most attractive guy on the planet. I think that's pretty well agreed. But Van Morrison smoking a dimp is even less attractive. I mean, if you look at Grace Jones next to Van Morrison, this album cover has appeal, and this album cover has absolutely no appeal, which is a shame. I'm sure people look through the racks, and this album maybe gets overlooked. It's certainly not up there when it comes to Van Morrison's albums. I don't have a huge amount of Van Morrison albums, but when the ones I do have, when I play them, I always enjoy them. I certainly don't like that cover, Van Morrison and Wavelength. And finally, I'm going to show an album cover that's it's not a good one at all. For some reason, this album, Dennis Coffey and Back Home from 1977, features an ashtray full of dimps, which is not a good look. I mean, if you're going through the racks and you see that, it is not appealing. Even got it on the back as well. Dennis Coffey, I mean, there's plenty of trumpets and horns on this. Really good album. James Griffiths is a channel on the VC, one of my favourites, and his I always watch his videos from years ago. He used the track Back Home at the start of a lot of his videos, so when he actually played this album, I thought of James Griffiths straight away. But yeah, it's not got a good album cover. So yeah, Dennis Coffey and Back Home. So there's 10 albums featuring cigarettes. Just thought it was an interesting subject. These days, you know, cigarettes smoking is sort of frowned upon. You know, you're not breaking the law when you smoke. It's, you know, people do it. People vape these days. Whether there's any album covers with people vaping, I'm not too sure. Maybe tell me in the comments. If anyone's got any comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching my video, and bye for now.